Good Morning Macragge. This is Jack, and the other side I have
Tony.
Tony, and we are we're kicking off a little podcast. Our idea is to sort of focus on Warhammer 40,000. It's the game that we both really enjoy, and we're going to use this podcast to talk about it and grow us if over time. We're hoping to grow into something a little more streamy, if you will, and friendly and YouTubey. But we're starting off with a podcast to see how we go.
Yep. Just starting off small, starting off very small and steady. See what we can build, and then build off that as we continue. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So our basic, we want to keep our shows fairly short. So somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes, we'll talk about whatever's happening in the world of Warhammer. We might focus on novels. We might focus on lore or background. We might focus on tournaments or general events. Today's sort of a smattering because we're just getting started and we have a few things that we could talk about.
Yep. And starting for today, we want to kind of go over maybe what our own personal hobby projects are. And I'll start with that. So the hobby project that I'm working with at the moment is actually Mortarion. I'm painting him up for a friend. I actually have to deliver him to the friend tomorrow. And so I'm kind of having to burn the midnight oil with that. And other than that, during the painting, I'm listening to the new novel, Warhawk, which is the latest in the Siege of Terra novels. Listening to that through Audible, since Audible's the way to go for that kind of stuff. And that's where I'm at the moment with what's on my hobby desk and, where I am at, hobby-wise.
Yeah, so I've been kicking around a handful of things, and I honestly have to say I haven't been doing much of anything. But I recently did a major rebasing for Speed Freak Army for my orcs. And it's not sort of the current Speed Freak meta. It's just models I already owned. So like 15 bikes or 16 bikes or something like that. And a whole bunch of truck boys, some knobs, and a couple buggies that I had kicking around. And right now what's sitting on my desk that needs rebasing is some Burna boys. But what happened with the updated codex is for every 4 Burna boys, you need a mech. And I built my Burna boys so long ago that it was just 15 Burna boys. And so so I have to make some changes to and find some mechs. So I ordered some with a GW voucher and they just came in. So I have a couple mechs to build and paint. And then I rebase the Burna boys, and then I have a unit of Burna boys to jump in a truck. And then non-40K related, I have an event coming up that I need all these endless spells for from Age of Sigmar, like a narrative event. So today I spent a bunch of time putting them together, the endless spells. But that's sort of my hobby right now. On my commute, I'm listening to Hell's Reach about Grimaldus.
That's an awesome book.
Yeah, it's so good. Like
the audio of it alone is excellent. The gentleman, I forget his name off the top of my head, who made the a YouTube video of it. It's like an abridged version.
Okay,
it's awesome.
It's so good. I'm driving in the car, and I'm just absolutely amazed at how good it is. I get to work and I sit in the car and finish the chapter, even if it's 10 minutes. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helps that the author is, I'm going to butcher his name, Aaron Dembski Bowden,
yeah.
I think his name. But he's a phenomenal author. And then you have, one of GW's best narrators going through it as well. And it's just incredible.
Yeah.
I remember specifically, this was before I even got into the audiobooks, reading that novel, and it was just amazing. And then when it came out in audiobook form, I went and bought it then, and it just makes it even more amazing.
Yeah, it does. The sort of Space Marine battle books, some of them are good and some of them not so. But this particular one just feels like such a compelling story. And the characters, I mean, the Black Templars and Helbret and Grimaldus have been such an integral part of 40K and Armageddon since, like 2004, maybe, that Armageddon book came out. Something like that, 2003 or something. It was just great. Actually, you know what? It might have been 2001, now that I'm thinking, because I think I found that book when I first got out of boot camp for the Marines, and I was in training in Lejeune, and I found it off base at a game store.
About the time I got out of the boot camp as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I definitely agree with you. It's an awesome book. I didn't know much about Black Templars until that book, other than they're like, okay, you guys are fanatics, religious fanatics, and you hate, psychers and mutants, but you'll accept these divine providence from the Emperor for whatever reason. All right, cool. 40K is not exactly unknown for its hypocrisy.
Yeah, I know. It's very interesting because I very much enjoy Sisters of Battle because it's sort of opposite of how I am in real life, like not very religious or anything, but these crazy zealot, faith-driven models like that, like the entire army is driven on faith. And I think Black Templars appeal to me a little bit in that same way, simply because it's sort of the opposite of what I do on a daily basis. And so if you're going to embrace some sort of fantastic elements, why embrace the same thing you would do on any given day?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there is, like from an entertainment perspective, seeing that kind of zeal, and that zeal is also rewarded, and you're in a universe where, it's like the orcs have it more, but it's like a clap your hands if you believe kind of deal, where the more faith you put towards something, the more that faith is rewarded. And it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that follows the Emperor. It could be really anything. And like I said, orcs especially so.
Yeah, orcs definitely fit that vibe. I mean, they're an army I've had literally since the early 90s, mid 90s, when I was first getting out of high school. And they, it's sort of why do orc vehicles work? Well, they believe that they do, right? Like why do their weapons shoot? Well, they just really believe that they can, and thus it is. So, that idea I find fascinating. This sort of collective energy that is created with the warg powers when they all, like so many, get together and raise these effigies and then stomp them towards hive cities and just stamp them into dust.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of orcs and also the speed freaks, did you see that the new Octarius book has given them new rules?
I also saw that it looks like they're bringing back the looted wagon.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah,
I don't recall if it's for competitive play, but at least that they're bringing it back in some way.
Yeah, I think I wish that they would bring it back for matched play, because I don't see why it's that big a deal. But they used to, the looted wagon has taken many iterations over the years, and maybe that's something I could talk about at length at one point. But ages ago, it was just you pick a vehicle and you from any other book, and you use that sort of vehicle, and you change the rules slightly because it's orcs. And then it disappeared for a bit, and then it came back again. And it, like, at one point it was just the one sort of entry for a single vehicle, no matter what looted vehicle it was just like, this is what it is, and this is its options. And then they had like a sort of 3-tiered, I think at the end of 7th maybe, or maybe a White Dwarf article in 8th. I don't think it was in 8th though. But I think at the end of 7th, you had like a 3-tier, like like a Chimera sized chassis, a Lehman Russ sized chassis, and then sort of a Land Raider sized chassis, and you had different rules for each of them. And now, it was it disappeared again, and now it's back in some form in this new Octavius book, which is interesting to me. But I do think, I don't think that the Speed Freaks need any particular help, but any other thematic lists I think are pretty cool.
Yeah, like I definitely see that it's a thematic list. I'm a Dark Angel player myself, and lately I've been playing Ravenwing, so I like the fact that they, I can play Ravenwing and not be penalized CP wise for it. And it looks like orcs are going to be able to do the same. There are limitations. Like it looks like you cannot bring any infantry whatsoever. So
right.
no boys and bikes. I'm sorry, not boys and bikes. Boys in trucks or anything like that. It's got to be, your buggies and your bikers and things like that. Right. I don't even think your new, the new cavalry that you have, the Squig Riders.
Oh, right. They probably don't count, no.
Yeah, it didn't look like they counted, but you also, to do this, you have to give up, I believe it's your clan culture.
Oh.
You have to give that up. You're still the clan, right? So you're still like freebooters or what have you, but you don't get the clan culture. You get something else instead that's going to give you, for example, like, I think it's like +1 attack on the charge and things like that. So that way you can, it definitely emphasizes that you need to get up there.
Right.
Another benefit was along the lines of even if you advance, you count as if you just did a normal move.
Right. That's some of the stuff that feels like it's missing. When I was the last time I played my Orc Speed Freak list, it just felt, like you get 2 units on first turn that if they're really lucky can get across the board and charge. But then everything feels so disjointed after that it just makes it sort of difficult for it to feel like Speed Freaks. That said, having an additional sort of rule set in a new book is just sort of fun. And they also have where the blood axes are in there too, right? So, that's where the looted vehicle comes from. So,
right. And I think, like, with the Speed Freaks, what was it? There was a tournament recently where orcs won that tournament, like a GT. And the gentleman who won that tournament, like, he decimated, like, the final game, he decimated his opponent. Now, there's a caveat to this in that his opponent went first and more or less kind of went with an all-out gambit to try to beat the orc player and failed.
Right.
So thus, now the orc player can just be like, I'm going to pounce on you. But if I was reading appropriately the aftermath, it was like he wiped, on average like 1,800 points in that game in one round. Whereas in the previous rounds, he's wiping off, 800 to 900 points of someone's army. So he's really good, and his list for the Speed Freaks was incredible.
Yeah, there was I'm not sure if this particular list had it, but I think there's a list that's using the freebooters culture mixed with other sort of elements of the orc lists. So, you ended up with these really interesting combinations of shooting and charging and, like free wound output on different buggies and all of this sort of, the speed warg and the regular warg sort of balancing stuff out. And I think Gazgul can do that. Or if you have a couple separate detachments where you get a guy calling a warg on one turn and a speed warg on another turn, and you just create these sort of... I don't know the rules well enough to figure out what exactly they're doing, but there's something about that freebooters culture that is, allows there to be sort of a few shenanigans.
One of the things that the freebooters does, because I went to a tournament at Midcard Games a few weekends ago, and one of my opponents was playing freebooters orcs, speed freaks. So I got to be on the receiving end of that. And the big thing that the freebooters get to do is if they kill a unit in shooting, any unit, then the whole army gets +1 to hit.
Right.
So now you're hitting on 4s pretty much across everybody, unless it was like a grot gunner, and then it's like hitting on 3s.
Right.
And the amount of shots that orcs can throw, I mean, that's a meme, since forever.
Right.
But when you're hitting on half of them now,
right.
That's a different story.
Well, back when, in 7th, no, maybe not 7th, maybe 8th edition, where Bad Moons had the exploding 6s, where if you hit with a 6, you get another shot. And, I've been, so before I was a Speed Freak player, I was a Bad Moon player for years and years, like way back into 5th edition when it was a terrible idea. But I would have these mobs of 30 shooter boys. You put 3 big shooters in there, and you're just pumping out like over the course of a shooting phase with 3 mobs of 20 or 30 boys. I mean, they're just like hundreds of shots, and you're just, exploding 6s left and right. And it just, it's like, well, it doesn't matter how many dice you roll because you're going to be getting so many hits. It was just, and you could reroll 1s for some reason. So you got a chance to, for Bad Moons, you explode 6s, but you got to reroll 1s. I mean, it was just so good. It was just so good.
Yeah, you just, at that point, you just, weight of averages. And it's like, oh, you're a Terminator save? That's fine. Go make 30, 40, 50 saves.
Right.
It doesn't matter. I don't, sooner or later, you're going to roll a bunch of 1s, and you're going to be picking up models off those tables. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, I see how that, just the volume of fire and better odds of hitting, and plus the buggies with the assault weapons are just, the assault weapons, they're so few and far between now, and the rules are better for them than the DACA weapons. But when you're hitting army-wide on 4s, none of that really matters, right? Because if you have a bunch of tank busters, for instance, and, like hitting on 4s makes those guys super tough.
Right. Or even those rocket buggies. Because now they come in and they have huge range anyway,
right.
So long as they got line of sight in there. Those are the biggest dreads for me because that gentleman had 3 of them, and they would come in and he's just throwing dice at me, and each one that went through was picking up a bike.
Right. Yeah. So I think orcs are in a good place. I think every army that's been released, not every, because I feel like Space Wolves are kind of missing a couple things, just through conversations with folks. But you look at Space Marines, orcs, Sisters, Admech, Dark Eldar. They all seem to be, although Dark Eldar don't have a new book, do they? They're still working on their old one.
No. Dark Eldars have their own book, and They are one of the strongest on the tables in any competitive play. Them, Admech, and Grey Knights are what I hear about, but from at least the local tables here in the Northeast, local tournament here in the Northeast, the main ones I'm seeing that seem to be regularly winning are the Drukhari and Grey Knights.
Yeah.
And they're almost always on, the top 3 tables.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that Sisters are still hanging around. I know that orcs are there. I feel like as new books come out, everything else will sort of balance itself out. I feel like Necrons are one of the few armies that have sort of been left behind. And I think it has a lot to do with sort of what their core choices keyword is and where it's placed. I feel like if they just threw out an errata that changed what was core and what wasn't for Necrons, it would balance out their sort of attendance in tournaments a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that. My main thing though is that the choices for Necrons, right? And especially since like this kind of problem has always been the situation, because Necrons are one of the, they're the one of the first codexes for ninth edition, right? And yeah, Space Marines was the other one, but at the same token, like Space Marines never really have ever been in a bad position, I think, in any edition since they're the poster boys.
Right.
Whereas Necrons, sometimes they're super strong, sometimes they're not. But if you look at their core choices and what's not a core choice, it makes a lot of sense from a lore perspective. A lot of their stuff makes a lot of sense, rules-wise. It just, it may not, I'm not seeing, and that, maybe I just have no imagination, where you don't really have many options with the existing direction that they went in terms of what could we throw in to make it core.
Right. And not for nothing, but a 20 skeleton, Necron blob, right, with a couple characters around it is almost impossible to kill. Like, by the time you get it down to a few models, then you have a character with, you have some war gear around it, and then you regrow a couple guys, and then by the time you're done, you're like back up to like 12 models, and you had them down to like 6, and you're like, oh crap, here we go again. Every time I've played against Necrons, I feel like I've done a whole bunch of work for nothing because I just couldn't get the last few off the table.
Right. And, I think some of the more competitive lists, you're talking about bringing at least 2 of these units, sometimes 3.
Right.
But I mean, that's, it all really depends on the player and how they're playing. I know for my Necron army, I do use 2 big blocks of 20 for me personally, and then some, immortals to stick on a back objective and let them sit there.
Right.
But yeah, it's unless they can dedicate a huge amount of fire towards them, then they got to just let them kind of do their thing. And if they're with those Gauze Reapers now, those, strength 5, AP -2, 1 damage, that's, once they hit somewhere in the middle, you can't really deal with them unless you can somehow deal mortal wounds.
Right.
And not every army can do that.
No, not a lot. But, it's interesting because now that Thousand Suns are out, I wonder if people figure out how to do a lot more mortal wound output, Grey Knights as well, if the psychic phase becomes a little bit more relevant. That's not the word. Prevalent is the word I'm looking for. If the psychic phase becomes something that people actually have to care about again, because I don't think I've seen a lot of people play with the psychic phase since 9th has come out.
So I think with that, right, you kind of hit like you hit an interesting nail there, right? Because do I think that the psychic phase is going to be more relevant? Absolutely, right? The prevalence of the Grey Knights players at the tournaments definitely shows that, they're making waves. I haven't seen anybody do Thousand Suns, but I mean, I'm sure, we're only in a small portion of the Northeast, right?
Right.
So, but at the same token, right, what are those 2 armies really good at, right? They're full of witches, and they're really good at the psychic phase. Now, as someone who doesn't play with psychics, or, most armies can dabble in it in some way, you have a choice, right? Just like how if you are a Knights player, if you decide to bring all Knights, you're kind of giving up the points because of Titan Slayer, right?
Yeah.
It's like tailor-made to score against you.
Yep.
Well, you got the Abhor the Witch or whatever it is, where you're getting points every time a psychic unit dies. And those armies, even though they're strong, they have no choice but to give up those points. It makes it easy. However, the person can only take that Abhor the Witch ability for secondaries if they themselves have no psychers.
Correct.
Now, obviously, for like Necrons and Tau, that's, who cares? And same thing with like Drukhari. Nobody cares. But if you were Space Marines or maybe a Space Wolf player and you want to bring a Rune Priest, no. If you are Eldar player,
right.
So you gotta weigh it in terms of what are you gonna do, because this guy, they're literally like, I'm gonna give you 15 points if you don't take Psychers, which generally also means a lack of psychic defense as well.
Well, if you think about Sisters and Templars, they both of those armies have ways to not only deny psychic attacks, but to gain points for killing Psychers, right? So both of those, I think, sort of balance out a little bit that versus Grey Knights versus Thousand Suns. So if you take a pure, psychic heavy list, and then you go up against Templars or Sisters, well, you're going to be giving, every model that dies is feeding Templars and Sisters points, and they still have the ability to deny them with special abilities and embedded rules in their books. So,
right, yeah, I think Sisters will, like, depending on maybe the order of Sisters, on a 5-up, they deny automatically,
right?
Which can be devastating when you're like, yeah, a third of your spells aren't going to go through.
And Templars have a CP. A command action that they can play for 1 CP, and then on a die on a 4+, they just ignore the psychic attack.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of armies have some form of psychic defense, but in general, like a lot of the Space Marine armies don't. In general, like obviously Black Templars. Accepted, but like Ultramarines don't really have much for psychic defense unless they bring their own Psychers, or
right.
Salamanders, which is another popular, very popular Space Marine chapter to bring. Too bad, right? Blood Angels, same thing,
right? So jumping off the Templars, why don't we shift over into sort of new release stuff, because we did see on Friday. On November 5th, we saw another post on Warhammer Community talking about designing the Emperor's Champion, Grimaldus, and Helbrecht. So it makes you sort of wonder, is that next wave of Templars inbound? Since that box has been out for, a month or so now? So we have that. And then, a couple other things up that are coming would be... we still have heavy rumors, though GW still not confirmed it, about the Horus Heresy box, which some rumors indicate might be up to $250 to $300 for a big box for Horus Heresy, and then that Gene Stealers and Custodes box coming. So,
yeah, there's definitely a bunch of, at least for the Custodes and the Gene Stealer box, we know that's coming, and we know that that's coming around. In December, Christmas time frame, so that's great. As far as the rumor mill in terms of the 30K box set, so far that's still just rumors.
Right.
Now they just released Jagatai, so all the Primarchs are out. So if they were going to put out a 30K box set, around now would be the time, or at the very least they put out like a preview of what he looks like and what have you. I don't think he's up for order yet.
Yeah, I think there's I think what, if I can be so bold as to make a generic prediction, is I think if a new box set comes out, it will shift from sort of Horus Heresy to Siege of Terra, just like the novels did, and the Khan was a big part of the defense of Terra. So you have this, I think it's a perfect segue into, right, here's a big box, here's a Siege of Terra, here's, probably going to come with a couple tanks, it's probably going to come with a ton of infantry. And then you repackage those already plastic models and get them back onto shelves as regular product. Because right now they're all direct and they don't really do much. And if they released in another round of plastic armor, because I think they have Mark III and Mark IV right now, and if they released another mark of armor, got it out into people's hands, and then were like, and also here are a couple of the core tanks that you can use in plastic. You can see that Forge World has sort of refocused to very specific characters. I mean, even some of the Blood Bowl and a bunch of the Necromunda upgrades have shifted over to plastic. So Forge World is really just focused on very specific character models at this point. And so taking a couple tanks off their hands and putting them in plastic would only benefit GW and Forge World as far as sales and organization.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the things that they were rumoring about is that there would be a plastic Spartan.
Yes.
So, like that alone, I would pick up that box set for that. And yeah, having extra bodies and, Heresy armor and all that stuff. Heresy equivalent armor, your Mark IIIs, your Mark IVs, even maybe like a Mark II or something like that. That's all fine and dandy for me. But, I already have a Spartan as well as it's in the Spartan chassis. I think it's like a Typhoon siege engine or what have you.
Right.
Another Lord of War choice that's just god awful, and it's been god awful for forever, ever since 8th. Yeah. But we have, both of those. They're both fiddly and a pain in the butt to assemble with your, with the existing ways that they do it in resin, especially since they're some of the older models. Whereas like the newer models that Forge World has put out, like the Primarchs and stuff like that, they're much better in comparison to, like their old planes and things like that, or even, the old Land Raiders.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you think about some of the early Primarchs, I mean, if you look at Korax, the fragility of that model based on his, those wings he has, it was just a really fragile model. I know because I have him. He's in my display case because I was going to go for a Raven Guard 30k army back at the end of 7th, but then I ended up ditching it once 8th came out because 8th was a way better system than 7th.
Agreed.
And so, but like I've assembled for people a bunch of Forge World models from that era, and it's just awful. It has, I mean, when you have a chunk of resin track for a tank, and you're holding it in your hand, but when you take it out of the bag, it's twisted, and you're like, it's going to take me hours of dunking in water and heating and bending and like reforming this thing to get it straight just so I can glue it to the next component. Like, it's a problem. And I'm hoping that, especially with Spartans and, you get to see some of that transition into plastic because it's just better for everyone.
I agree. I think what they really need to do, though, is, I mean, the models are good. Like, if they made all that stuff into plastic, great. But I think what they really need to do to make those models move again is they need to update the 30K rule set to an 8th or 9th edition equivalent, because the 7th, in my opinion, and it may be unpopular because I know like the 30K fan base is maybe probably a little bit more hardcore than the 40K fan base, and that's fine, what have you. But in my opinion, even though you had your 7th edition, and I would say that the Horus Heresy games using the 7th edition rule set were better than the traditional 40K in 7th edition.
Definitely.
However, even the most mediocre 8th edition game, to me, feels miles better than even the best Horus Heresy game that I played.
I agree with that. Like, the worst 8th edition game that I played was still better than the best 7th edition game that I played. Even, it doesn't matter if it was between Horus Heresy or regular 40k in 7th. It was just a lot of stumbling over rules interactions and data sheets. And I mean, goodness, I had a Mechanicus army or not a Mechanicus, an ad mech for 40k. And I literally had 3 pages of notes, like where I'd have a note section for each unit to identify whether the 6s in the shooting phase or the wounding phase had like some other bonus or not. It was just, there were so many rules on top of rules on top of rules. 7th edition just needed to go away.
And I mean, I know that there's things that when they shifted to 8th, right? Some things did go away. Some things went away that I wish didn't go away. But in the end, I think overall, I think they made the right decision. The 9th edition is definitely more of an expansion of 8th. I feel more refined where they were going with 8th, where in the sense that they made such a drastic decision in 8th and introduced new concepts, ripped out old concepts, right? It's such a drastic decision that, yeah, it's better, but it, now playing with hindsight, it's not where like probably as good as it could have been. And certain decisions that they made really started going out of control. Not as much as 7th, but still out of control. For example, that you could stack hit and wound rolls so ridiculously that you can make it so that way units were unhittable. Eldar.
Oh, yeah.
A particular faction of Eldar did that. Or you can make it so that way you were unwoundable. I remember specifically somebody charged me with, I had Deathwing Knights at the time, and he charged me with a bunch of grots because it was either this or nothing, right?
Right.
Because he was on dire straits. So he charged me with the grots, and they were like strength 2. So they're already wounding me on 6s.
Correct.
And you had a stratagem that I could go, -1 to wound.
Right.
For this unit, Fortress of Shields. So now it's like, you just charged me and those grots did nothing. They literally cannot hurt me.
Right. Yeah, I think that I loved 8th a lot because of its simplicity. And it took me a while to kind of get going with 9th. But once I did, I realized that it was better in the rules interactions, in the way secondaries were set up, right? That they had a plan for matched play, and that plan makes everything so much easier. And I think that's super duper important.
I agree, because I remember doing some tournaments in 7th, and it was, all right, whatever the frontline gaming crew says, that's pretty much what a lot of tournament players were. Because the frontline gaming crew was the only side that was trying to trying to put out a rule set that, people could use to do competitive play. And when you looked at that, they were basically redefining huge chunks of the game and removing certain models from play altogether. Because they were like, well, look, like you bring this, it's like an auto win. So you can't bring these models.
Right.
And now you go to almost any tournament. Granted, I can't speak for all of them, but all the ones that I have gone to, it's generally like, just follow the GT booklet and call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It makes the GT booklet makes everything smooth and easy. And in fact, this is coming from a guy who was, at this point, I've run a bunch of tournaments, competitive tournaments over the years. And I think that the running of a tournament now is easier than it's ever been for the tournament organizer. So, and it's just, with you, I'm stumbling over my words here. Sorry. So, with the advent of the GT book from Games Workshop, and the, what's it called? The Best Coast Pairings app, functionally, the event could almost run itself. And most of the time they do, without any major rules interactions that are strange where people ask for rulings. But otherwise, you have a tournament organizer that's also the judge, and then you just play, right? And you figure out rulings that hiccup as they come in, So, and speaking of that, let's jump into, what are your thoughts on the Genestealer cults and Custodes?
So I know Custodes right now are in a good position, and I think this new champion will work well. I know that like the rumor bill was like, oh, he's going to be like a lieutenant, and it doesn't look like it. It looks like he's more of a champion than anything.
Right.
But, which is great. I mean, Custodes are all champions, but, this guy's a champion among champions and all that good stuff.
Right.
And that's good. It's more variety and all that stuff. I don't know if I would use him in my existing Custodes army, but that's that. As far as Genestealers go, I think they're one of the factions that need the most help.
They definitely do.
And I have not fought personally against a Genestealer army since 7th. And so I have an idea of how they play because, watching YouTube and watching battle reports and things like that. But virtually everywhere I hear anybody talk about them is that they are very underpowered and very much a glass cannon that happens to be missing the cannon.
Yeah, so it's sort of, the Guard hasn't received a codex yet either. And, right now I feel like Guard are, same with Tau, you mass them up and you try to fire, use the firepower of sort of the horde, if you will, and hope that can carry you through. And you have some units that can bump out here and there. But an isolated unit of Guard doesn't scare anyone. Well, Genestealer cult is basically Guard penalized. So, right, they're not even on the same. So now you have an army who's designed to break out and be piecemeal. And guess what? That doesn't really work right now, because a piecemeal force where, hey, here's a unit of 10 guys or 15 or 20 guys that just popped up here. Okay, well, I'm going to deal with those pretty rapidly because, most armies have a strong short range, medium range threat level. I mean, so, look, I have 10 orcs in a truck. Well, they're just going to redirect and charge in and neutralize that unit. I'm just going to shoot my heavy intercessors over here instead and remove that unit. My flame aggressors are going to drop down and just burn those things to bits. They need something more than they currently have. They're not as good as, a horde of Guard. They're not as good as a squad of sisters. Just they need the most help right now. And so hopefully Genestealer cult kind of gets that. And I know in the Warhammer Day conversation, one of the guys talked about how the interactions of sort of units popping up and creating a crossfire is super beneficial. So it'll be interesting. It will be interesting to see those rules and how those rules interact and how this army sort of is shaped in 9th edition, because they really need some work. And they need more than just the demolitions expert, but that's all they're going to be getting, it seems.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, like, the real thing, if they get a good rules bump, just like pretty much any other army,
yeah,
that's gotten a rules bump once their codex comes out. Every 9th edition codex has been a huge power upgrade.
Yep.
I feel that theirs is going to be no different. And it's just that, yeah, like right now, if they're a bunch of isolated Gene Stealer groups, they don't, they're paper thin in terms of defense. And some of their units can be very deadly if they get into melee range, I believe, aberrants and things like that.
Correct.
But they're not, it's getting them into that combat, right? It'd be a whole different story if all of a sudden Gene Stealers or Gene Stealer cults like, oh yeah, we have ways to pop up 6 inches away or 5 inches away or 3 inches away or even closer, like they could in 7th. And then it's like, oh, that's a whole different story when the aberrants spawn and they're 6 inches away or an inch away, or like a broodlord is like an inch away, and he's in the back of your lines, and it's like, oh crap, this thing's going to rip into me, and there's nothing I can do about it for a little while.
Right, or the idea of, like, we see this in the Warhammer Plus Blood Angels animation, and it's like these never-ending hordes, and I do wonder if there's some means in which to be like, okay, I spend 2 CP and this unit comes back, right? And it's like, oh crap, like now I have to deal with another full-size unit again, and things like that. That stuff sort of interests me. Does it, because we've seen a lot of armies, orcs especially, I think, sort of have rules that are benefiting from the lore, and I'm hoping that Gene Stealer cult does that too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do hope that they have other ways to, get in your lines, and like, yeah, they're not individually strong, and I don't think that they ever really should, given their setup, but kind of like an army that's made to harass heavily. So like, you don't have, and they're spread out so that you're constantly having threats everywhere. But I mean, who knows? Let's see what they end up doing.
Right.
The new Demolitionist seems to really do nasty work if you're going against vehicles.
Right.
I think vehicles and monsters, but I know at least vehicles.
Yeah.
Where that you can just pump out mortal wounds.
And to be
to
like,
it pretty quickly.
Hey, I just, you didn't know this, but over there where that is, I just blew something up under your feet. Oh, well, like, that squad just took a bunch of damage. Like that vehicle, that, and I think that sort of rules interaction will be helpful to be like, okay, well, there's a bomb there now all of a sudden, and boom, right? And right, like, oh, that was a unit of intercessors on an objective. That's not good. So things like that.
Right. And like, as far as like the Custodes are definitely, they're obviously not the strongest right now, but they're doing decent. But I think one of the main problems for them right now is that the only reason why they're doing decent is Forge World, right? Their Forge World rules and their Forge World units are really good in comparison to the plastic units that they have.
Correct.
And I feel like that needs not necessarily to swap around, but if it's like, look, I'm only really, if I'm going to play competitive, I just got to go to Forge World to get all my models. That doesn't really feel right. I feel like there should be more, especially on the plastic side. All the models look good, but it's just, I feel like their core models in plastic need to be bumped up to the same level, or at least
those
comparable.
dreadnoughts. The dreadnoughts need to be plastic, as far as I'm concerned, and
oh yeah,
and so the dreadnoughts making those plastic would be a huge step in the right direction for Custodes, but also fill in sort of parts that they're missing, because right now what Custodes have, a bunch of infantry and some jet bikes, and then everything else is coming from Forge World, and that's just not enough. And they'll incorporate the Sisters of Silence back, the Talons of the Emperor, so to speak, and just so that will get them some strong anti-psyker in the new book. But I don't know. All the Custodes armies I've seen typically have augmented something. Like, oh, they're a unit of scions in there. There are like a couple units in there to grab objectives, like whether it's guard or something. So I don't know. I think, yeah, Custodes are interesting, but they do rely heavily on the Forge World units, and I'd like to see those Forge World units sort of shift to plastic.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, those models look amazing. Um, I remember playing against one player, and he had, off the top of my head, 4 of those dreadnoughts. 2 of them with the shields, and 2 of them with like a large halberd,
Yep.
and they were incredible. They were absolutely devastating. And with the Custodes playstyle, they have a tool for pretty much everything,
Right.
a stratagem for pretty much everything. So they were, if unless you were hitting them in multiple different areas with the same kind of attacks, if you just hit them in one area with like anti-tank weaponry, they could throw a whole bunch of stratagems at you, and your anti-tank weaponry becomes much, much less efficient.
Right. So, well, let's start thinking, because we're about 50 minutes in. I know we don't want to go too long. So let's think about just wrapping up. Today we talked a bit about just generally what we're doing here. We talked about some hobby stuff that we've done. And we talked about a bunch of event stuff and where the editions have spawned, and talked about the 30K potential and the Gene Stealer cults and Custodes. And I think generally we're just sort of looking forward to what are upcoming tournaments and events that we're doing. There aren't a lot of tournaments in the holiday season. There aren't. I haven't checked out what Webway is doing, the new game store in Marlborough. I know TJ's, where I do most of my regular gaming. I'm running a narrative Age of Sigmar event for Black Friday, and I think they're doing a Kill Team sort of tournament coming up, but there are no major tournaments, I think, until the new year. What about in your area? What do you have up there?
The only place is, like you said, it's not much, if anything, is happening in November at all.
Right.
At the time of this recording. And on top of that, the only ones that I see for 40K are going to be up in New Hampshire, in Derry, New Hampshire. It looks like Midgard, the Midgard games, essentially. So,
and I know that
that's it.
Yeah, TJ's Devin, the guy there, the Games Workshop guy there, has organized some what he calls just clashes, right? Age of Sigmar Clash, 40K Clash, and it's just a bunch of people coming together and throwing dice in a semi-organized way for a couple games. And I think I've been talking to him about finding ways to make that more relevant, but it's not tournament, it's not organized events, it's just sort of rolling dice and sort of collecting points for sort of towards like something. Like if you go to enough each month, then you can get like a model for free or something like that. But I'm not sort of 100% sure how he's working those, but I know they're trying to push a lot more events on Saturdays and Sundays, but who knows how that's going to go. I am looking forward to the January. I'm going to run another big tournament out of TJ's, but I noticed that I scheduled it at the same time that there's another major tournament, I think, at Midgard, so I probably am going to shift the tournament I'm running a week so that people can take care of both,
Yeah, I hear that. And I think, and then soon after that is going to be the LVO over in Las Vegas. I'm actually debating whether or not to go there myself.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that I've never been a big tournament player. I stopped going to tournaments ages ago. The last tournament I went to was up in Crossroad, up in Maine, in Standish, I think. And that was like a terrible experience. And so I haven't done any, like I've organized tournaments, but I haven't actually played. So I'm actually looking for 2022. One of my hobby goals in general is just getting and playing a couple tournaments, bringing a list, practicing with it, and just seeing what I can do on a competitive, because I always play very casually and sort of loosey-goosey. So I'd like to try at least one tournament out there not as an organizer, but as a participant, and see how I do.
I would definitely recommend it. At least so far, at least with my experience anyway, I haven't really played any tournament thus far where I've faced anybody who's, that guy, right? We all know what we're talking about.
Right.
And I haven't fought anybody who, made the day, made it's like, oh, this is just god awful or anything like that. The closest that anyone has ever come was simply a player who played very slow. We're talking after, 2.5 hours allotment, maybe we are halfway through turn 2. Right. But that has been pretty rare. But I do like the fact, me personally, in the sense that not necessarily competitiveness, though, it is competitive. I get to play and I get to play 3 games, right? And I get to play and basically be like, look, this is a tournament. People here are going to try to go all out. And it's fine for you to go and be like, look, I'm going to try to play and I'm going to try to do the best that I can, have some fun. But, I'm here to win. I'm here to play and go all out. Where things can be a little bit different when you're playing maybe a pickup game with some friends. You don't know necessarily how the other person is, if they're new, if they're still trying to get the grasp of how to play the game, or, how competitive they are. And, you're like, say, a Death Guard player, and you throw Mortarion down on because like, hey, you just painted him, you want to play with him, and they're like, no, I don't want to play against Mortarion today.
Right.
Yeah,
I do think there's, competitive, you have to go into a competitive tournament with that mindset of, the whole point is to win. There are enough stores that have casual gaming that you can find that basically anywhere, right? If you want to get a casual game in, you can go almost anywhere to a store and set up a casual game. I'm starting to run some narrative events, and I love that too. But I think it's a mindset, right? Like, if people can love all different types of games, but if you're going to a tournament, you have to understand that people are, everyone's paying like $20 to $30 to get in the door and hopefully win something on their way out. So.
Yep, I agree.
But that said, go ahead.
I was going to say, we're going to wrap that up. And,
yeah. So I was actually just going to say, this is us just getting started. So, keep a lookout for our social media. Like, things are going to be, the things for social media are going to be coming. Like, look for emails, look for things like that coming. Right now we're just kind of kicking the can. We're going to see how this goes, see how this recording ends up once it goes to the editing. And we'll see what happens. But be on the lookout for more. So this is Jack, and opposite me is
Tony.
Awesome. And this is, Good Morning Macragge, and can't wait to chat with you again.